Welcome to Brother Miller's Notes. I was asked in my stake to teach an adult religion class. The topic I got to choose, so, I chose Isaiah. And I taught a lesson on chapters 15 to 23, and I'm just going to kind of record, hey, here's what we talked about in our class discussion. And so if you want any quotes or where I'm headed with this, you can find that at brotherrmiller.org. And I hope you enjoy. My purpose as I teach Isaiah, I add history and I try and do context, but my main focus is the relevance and applicability of Isaiah. I follow Nephi's reminder that one of the great purposes of Isaiah is to bring hope. It teaches people to go to Christ. And if we'll just compare it into our lives, apply it, it enables our hearts to rejoice, to be lifted up, to give us hope. And now I'm in 2 Nephi 25, just that reminder that the words of Isaiah are of great hope. And it's prophesied that we'll be able to understand them and their application in our day, the last days. And then the Savior's encouragement, search the words of Isaiah diligently. They're pretty awesome. So I hope that today as we go through, if you want a little bit more context or content, I have a commentary that you can read. I hope it does really good for you. But my hope is that as I just kind of go through this, that you find something relevant and applicable to you. Beginning with chapters 15, Isaiah starts to send warnings to much of the world. I shouldn't say starts, because he's been doing it all along. But he's sending warnings to much of the world, starting with Moab. These warnings are from 15 to 23, and that's why I grouped them together and teaching it together. In some cases, Isaiah warns the nations of their impending destruction, especially those which surround Israel. So here's a map of what it looks like in the time of Isaiah. So chapters 15 and 16 are focused towards Moab on that part of the map. And then you have Isaiah 17, which is focused on Damascus. Chapter 18, a land beyond Ethiopia. I kind of put that off to the side. We'll talk about it when we get to chapter 18. 19 is to Egypt. 20 is to Edom. 21 is to those in Arabia. 22, you have words to Judah. And Tyre in 23. And maybe there's some other ones that are added in there. But that's going to be what we're going to focus on. Just each chapter or two on these places and what the Lord's going to tell these nations. We'll start off with Kingdom of Moab. Diblon is known today as Dibon in Jordan. The Moabites were the descendants of Lot, the nephew of Abraham. There were battles between Israel and Moab during the reigns of Saul and David, but David defeated Moab. And, quote, the Moabites became servants to David, bringing tribute. This payment of tribute evidently continued until after the death of Ahab, when the king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel. So here's a few of the just estimated dates. In 928 BC, estimated that's the year David defeats the kingdom of Moab. And you get 955 BC, Moab rebels. And it's around 715 BC when Isaiah is writing this. Sometimes it's really interesting to see how history is written. History is written by the victors. So this is not Israel's perspective, but after Moab rebels, the king of Moab, he writes his history and what he did to rebel against Israel and how he defeated them. And he etches it in a stone. This is the Moab king's account after that rebellion. And, quote, the Meshistele, I didn't say that well, was known as the Moabite stone. It's a stele dated around 840 BCE, containing a significant Canaanite inscription in the name of King Mesha of Moab, a kingdom located in modern Jordan. Mesha tells how Chemosh, the god of Moab, had been angry with his people and allowed them to be subjugated to Israel, but at length Chemosh returned and assisted Mesha from throwing off the yoke of Israel and restore the lands of Moab. And you may ask, why is it broken? Well, if you go to that Wikipedia site, it just says that, there's some interest in this stone, and when the locals kind of realized what it was, they broke it apart to kind of, hey, why doesn't everybody take a little bit of this good luck charm? And so they break it apart, take it back. Before it was broken apart, there was kind of the overlay where we had all the words. That's where we get some of the parts that we didn't recover. But then there's parts you can tell were part of the original. Here's what it says on this inscription. Quote, Omri was the king of Israel, and he oppressed Moab for many days. For Chemosh was angry with his land. And his son succeeded him, and he said, then there's kind of a blank, he too, blank, I will oppress Moab. In my days did he say so, but I looked down on him and his house, and Israel has gone to ruin. Yes, it has gone to ruin forever. Well, that's not the way it turns out. For this king, that's what he's kind of hoping. If you go there today, you don't see much of a kingdom anymore. It's not a power in the Middle East. Sometime during the Persian period, Moab really disappears from the extant historical record. Its history was subsequently overrun by waves of tribes from northern Arabia. The prophet Isaiah warns the Moabites that they will be destroyed, despite the fact that they were prosperous in trading and commerce. These two chapters create a wonderful chiasmus, with the focus, or most important point, being in chapter 16, verse 5. And here's the chiasmus. The first part of chapter 15, Moab, is certainly going to be ruined, destroyed. And at the end of chapter 16, Moab is eminently, their ruin is coming. You have also Moab grief is expressed as a part of this chiasmus. Then the third thing, the Lord's grief over what Moab's choosing to do. And then inside that, D1, Moab's plea for shelter. There's going to be some events that are going to happen in the kingdom of Moab where they'll want their refugees and they'll want to be able to have that shelter. And then he's going to say that's a lot's happening because of your pride. And then the focus, the middle of the chiasmus. There is peace, there is safety, and there is security found in Zion. And it's not just a physical thing. It's going to also focus to spiritual refugees coming into Zion. Well, if you look at Isaiah 15, you can summarize those first little bit by just looking at some of the verbs. I put them in red. Look how many times the word howl or weep or cry is in the first little bit. And you get the flavor of what's happening to Moab. This is a very difficult time. In chapter 16 starts off, Send ye the lamb to the ruler of the land of Selah, to the wilderness, unto the mount of the daughters of Zion. You get that idea that when you say Zion, it's here and now. Daughter of Zion, maybe it's a little bit in the future. But you're going to be sending one day a lamb, a sacrifice, to the daughter of Zion. You're going to be sending that to the Mount Zion in Jerusalem. Start now is the encouragement. This is what you need to do to get on the right track. Make the sacrifice. For it shall be as a wandering bird cast out of the nest. You can picture that in your mind. A bird gets put out of the nest and it's kind of just wandering aimlessly, wants to get back in the nest, can't fly yet. It's panicking. Now, verse 2, So the daughters of Moab shall be at the fords of Arnon. And the fords of Arnon really is part of the Arnon River. And you can see just right above my head a little bit of the map. It goes into the Dead Sea. It is a part of what they call, for them, it's like their Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon of Jordan. And you can kind of see from that picture, if you're going to go down through there, and you're in a panic, and you're in a flight, and now you have to go across that river, and you're going to have to go down that little Grand Canyon, it's going to be a very difficult thing. That's the sense that Isaiah is talking about in chapter 16. And then verse 3, the advice, take counsel, execute judgment. Or really, hey, advise us what to do. That's the sense of it. We need advice in this day of panic. Okay, and then I'm skipping to verse 4. Let mine outcast dwell with thee, Moab. There's a point where there's going to be refugees to Moab and from Moab. You start there, be a covert in verse 4. Be a covering, be a protection. Refugee comes, protect them from the face of really anything of danger, the spoiler. For the extortioner is at an end, the spoiler ceases, the oppressors are consumed out of the land. The idea, be that refugee to a to a refugee, be a covert protection. So in short, here's a summary. Moab, send lambs to the mount or the temple in Jerusalem. The plight of the refugees is going to be desperate. So the advice, take counsel, execute judgment. Or really, in other words, advise us what to do or decide for us, they're going to say. And be a covert for the refugees. And Zion is going to have a temple there. It's going to be a gathering place for desperate refugees. Give counsel and execute judgment or advise us what to do. And is a covert, a protection for refugees. And now just tying it together with the next verse. There are going to be refugees that are going to come and they're going to be looking for spiritual advice and physical safety, and they need to come to Zion. So here's Isaiah's main focus. Zion's just not a protection. It's more than that. It's the destination for all spiritual refugees. And verse 5, in mercy shall the throne of David, which is going to end up being Christ on it, be established. And he, Christ, shall sit upon it in truth and judgment. Truth in the tabernacle of David. Judging, seeking judging, and hastening righteousness. And I love that verb hastening. It means in Hebrew to make quick, to be prompt, skilled, and ready. And I think all this points to Christ helping us with us becoming more like him. And how does Christ help us become more like him, or help our righteousness become a little quicker to act? Or maybe a little bit more prompt in our acting. Maybe a little bit more skilled in what we do and say. And how does it make us ready to act? The first few verses are just looking at there's desperation in these refugees. And now verse 5, when we have God with us, we're listening to him, he will help us to act in righteousness. And not just act, but act promptly, act quickly, act in a skilled way. He's going to teach us, here's what we can do and say to be a more effective tool in the hands of God. He will make us ready to act as he would act. That's a part of the mercy that he extends to all of us. Just so you know, for Moab between 722 and 720 BC, Moab, Philistia, Judah, and Edom rebel against the Assyrian overlordship. Now, Assyria is the big superpower of the time. The rising is apparently put down. Moab remains a vassal and is recorded as paying tribute to King Sargon II of Assyria, but still apparently being led by a native ruler rather than a newly installed governor. Well, that's a part of fulfillment of Isaiah 16, verse 14, that Moab would rebel in 3 years' time and become small and feeble. They're not going to have the might and power that they once had, and that's the way they're going to remain. Now, moving on, chapter 17 focuses on an alliance about Syria and the northern kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, that they're going to make with each other. Okay, a little bit of background. In 732 BC, Syria was taken away by Assyria. That's why you get in verse 1, Damascus is taken away. That's already happened by the time when Isaiah is writing this. Isaiah writes this somewhere around 715 BC, 712 BC, somewhere in there. And there's a focus in that chapter. Why is all this thing happening? Why did you fall? Well, it's very simple. Because thou hast forgotten the God of thy salvation, and hast not been mindful of the rock of thy strength. Therefore, here's your future. You didn't remember God. You didn't remember the rock on which you should be established. Therefore, thou shalt plant pleasant plants. And I can picture that. I love my garden. Pleasant plants. And it'll be set with strange slips. Strange would be foreign. Slips are like offshoots. You're going to plant, but you're going to be planting in a foreign country, in a foreign land. It's not going to be your own, at least for a long time. I know I went fast through that, but chapter 18 is referred to in verse 1 as the land shadowing with wings, which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. And there's been a lot of kind of speculation. Okay, what lands is that? If you look at different commentaries, you'll see some different ideas. But for me, I like to visualize this just as a picture. In your mind, think of a land that may look like the wings of a bird. And if you put a bird in the middle of it, it looks like a bird with wings, and it's stretching them out. Well, President Joseph Fielding Smith once saw a picture like this of the land shadowing with wings. And he identifies this. This whole chapter is talking about the Americas, South and North America. President Joseph Fielding Smith said this, quote, "I will read from the 18th chapter of Isaiah because this has to do with the latter-day work. I think I will present it all. The way it begins in the King James Version is, quote, 'Woe to the land shadowing with wings, which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia.' This is a mistranslation. In the Catholic Bible it reads, 'Ah, land of the whirling wings, beyond the rivers of Cush.' And the Smith and Godspeed's translation, it reads, 'Ah, land of the buzzing of wings, which lies beyond the rivers of Ethiopia.' The chapter shows clearly that no woe was intended, but rather a greeting. As indicated in these other translations, a correct translation would be, 'Hail to the land in the shape of the wings.' Now, do you think you know of any land in the shape of wings? Think of your map. About 25 years ago, in one of the current magazines printed on the cover, the American continent in the shape of wings, with the body of the bird between. I've always regretted I did not preserve this magazine. Does not this hemisphere take the shape of wings, the spread out wings of a bird?" And so that background, that's how I study chapter 18. What is in 18 that could apply to the land shadowing with wings, or South and North America? That shadowing kind of is indicative, is a protection or a defense, especially against an evil or a feeble people. I think that's the way, in my mind, I see these continents. Countries that maybe some by their ability to, and others by their heart, their desires to look out for feeble people, to look out for people who are downtrodden, to go and help others. In verse 2, it is that this land will send ambassadors to those who are scattered and peeled. Those ambassadors will be carrying the gospel of Jesus Christ with them to those who are scattered, to bring them back in. And verse 3 is the focus there. Those people in this land will lift up the ensign. That ensign is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints on the mountains. It's going to lift it up and say, those of you who are scattered, this is how you come back. This is going to be the greatest protection and defense to you today, the gospel of Jesus Christ. And the influence of God is going to be felt in these lands and spreading out like clear heat upon the herbs. If you want to grow herbs, there are times where you got to have a little bit of heat on them. It makes them just grow wonderfully. And part of what that gospel going out by those ambassadors is going to just provide that growth, that influence of light and heat, because it comes from God. And a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. If you've ever been out hauling hay, you can visualize this. You picture just going out in that hay field, and you get the hay, and for me, when I was growing up, it was single bales, 50 pounds or so. And you're throwing it up. But in the morning, you get that dew, and it's nice and cool. And you're going to throwing up on the tractor or on the wagon, and you just love that little bit of dew when the heat of harvest. It gives you comfort. And the influence of God is going to be felt like that. It's going to be comfort. It's going to be cooling. It's going to be invigorating and helping us to grow. And then there's also a part of God's timing in the harvest and the pruning that happens in the Lord's vineyard. And then verse 7, it's kind of repeat. There is going to be a gathering of people who are scattered and peeled. And they're going to gather to the Mount Zion. Reference to God's temple. Chapters 19 and 20 deals with Egypt. Now a little bit of background on Egypt. And I'll be honest with you, I love the land of Egypt. It's fascinating to me. Egypt in Isaiah's day is not the superpower it had been. It's divided. It's been weakened by internal conflict. It's been weakened by some military losses. And right now, there's still a power And Assyria is the mega power, and they're kind of, not, I don't want to say proxy war, it's a trade war. That's kind of what's happening in the time of Isaiah's day. And Isaiah says, and history, they're going to be invaded by Assyria between 677 BC to 663 BC. And if you just look at the map, you can see the Assyrian Empire, 824 BC, it's dark green. Here's what it was. And then by the time you get 671 BC, look at how much it's spread. It goes from the superpower, I don't know if super duper isn't the right word, but it's the mega power. It's the dominant power. Well, Assyria has these wonderful little tabloids that they produce, letting you know how they kicked everyone's rear end. This is one from an Assyrian siege of an Egyptian fort. Probably a scene from the war that's about 667 BC. And that war refers to the capture of Memphis, Egypt. This is sculpted in about 645 to 635 BC. And right now, it's in the British Museum, sculpted under the reign of Ashurbanipal. And you can tell with any of these good Assyrian little reliefs, you got, and I get my cursor is, you got the Assyrians storming the castle, the walls. You have them expelling people off the walls to their doom. And you can tell the Assyrians are winning. And down below, the Assyrians, I don't know, maybe they're doing their little touchdown dance, but unfortunately, if you're Egyptian, you are being led off as slaves. You're the conquered. So they're invaded by Assyria. But the Assyrian Empire after this, it's like they've stretched themselves too far. There's a lot of internal civil wars that contribute to this. And the Assyrian Empire, that's its height. And then it starts to begin to disintegrate very rapidly. The Egyptian pharaoh, Spatmik, I don't know if I've got that one right. I mess up names in more than one language. Threw off his ties to the Assyrian Empire about 655 BC. There's the great battle of Megiddo. The Egyptian forces defeat Judean force under King Josiah and manages to reach the last remnants of the Assyrian army, about 609 BC. The Great Battle of Carchemish. This is in a lot of history books. Egyptian army is destroyed by the Babylonia, and they're allied with the Medes, Persians, and Scythians. And Ezekiel chapter 30 refers to that battle, that destruction of the Egyptian army. And so chapter 17 of Isaiah is a little bit of a summary, verses 1 to 7. You're going to suffer a string of bad things. That's the first 7 verses, until there's going to be 5 acts mentioned in verses 19 to 22 that will bring Egypt to Christ. And that's when the things change for Egypt. Egypt's conversion to the gospel of Jesus Christ will come through 5 acts that will bring them to God. First, they'll be reconciled at the altar of the Lord and make a covenant to remember Him and become His people. Second, the Egyptians will have a personal relationship to God through prayer. Third, they'll receive revelation from God and they'll know the Lord. Fourth, they'll act on His knowledge by making and keeping covenants or vows, as well as serving the Lord in verse 21. Lastly, they will be chastened and healed as they return even to the Lord. There's also a prophecy that one day lifetime enemies will become allies. These future allies will be Egypt, Israel, and Assyria. And in chapter 20, and just look at the picture first. This is kind of a picture of a Syrian king depicted after its victory over Egypt. And you'll see the Syrian king, big, got his little goblet, he's happy, got the staff, symbolic of my rule. And below him, in small, short person kneeling, is the Egyptian. That is the one who's now been subjugated, or as he's holding a leash, he's on a leash to the Assyrians. Okay, and for Isaiah chapter 20, verse 4, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptians, prisoners, and the Ethiopians captives, young and old, naked and barefoot, even with their buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Egypt. And, we kind of looked at this, just a little bit bigger picture of what now Ashurbanipal has commissioned to have printed. Printed isn't the right word, but imprinted is a better word. Chapter 21 deals with the kingdom of Moab and Babylon, and really for me, it focuses on one thought that's really relevant and applicable to us. It's the idea of watchtower. You set up a watchtower so you can have a good view of things that are going on. And Isaiah kind of focuses it on this, and I think he really enjoys this imagery because of how much it applies to his people and to us. For thus saith the Lord unto me, Go, set a watchman, and let him declare what he sees. Watchmen are those who God sets up on the tower to warn us. President Harold Bealey used verses in Isaiah 21 to show what a prophet sees and understands about the power of Satan and his unseen hosts. He stated, In a revelation to the prophet Joseph Smith, the Lord said that Satan drew after him a third part of the spirits of God whom God created, and that they with Satan became the force in the world to try to destroy the work of righteousness. That power was spoken of by Isaiah in a vision which he received, which he called a grievous vision, in which it was said, Set a watchman on the tower, to tell what he seeth, and report to the coming of the horsemen and chariots. But a voice spoke out of Mount Seir, saying, Watchman, what of the night? Suggesting that more to be feared than the enemies that could be perceived with the physical senses or could be seen by physical eyes were the power of darkness that came unseen by physical eyes. And I know I try to make sure all these quotes aren't put where my head is over them. Sorry about that. I'm trying to keep that doing better. The rest of the quote. That same thought was in the mind of the master, no doubt, when he said, And fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him who's able to destroy both soul and body in hell. The apostle Paul seemed to understand very clearly this same power when he declared, For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. And going back to that imagery of Isaiah, are there reasons for modern day watchmen on the tower, apostles and prophets, to feel, like in verse 1, their message, what they have to say, is a burden to them? They can't say the nice positive things that they want to just kind of say, like, you're doing so good. But sometimes they have to be told their message is one that they go, I don't really want to, it's tough, but I'm going to do it. Verse 3, that pains them, a message that maybe dismays them, and maybe sometimes, quite frankly, frightens them. I have been listening to prophets and apostles for decades. It seems to me, when the days that I'm recording this, the modern day prophets have some concerns. Maybe that's true of every age. But it's not very often that I hear a prophet use the word urge so much as President Nelson's using it now. I urge you. So last General Conference, he said this, And to each of you who has made temple covenants, I plead with you to seek prayerfully and consistently, to understand temple covenants and ordinances. Spiritual doors will open. You will learn how to part the veil between heaven and earth, to ask for God's angels to attend you, how to better receive direction from heaven. Your diligent efforts to do so will reinforce and strengthen your spiritual foundation. It's amazing. I plead with you. I don't know how many prophets are pleading with us. Same talk. Uses the word plead again when he said, The voices and pressures of the world are engaging and numerous, but too many voices are deceptive, seductive, and can pull us off the covenant path. To avoid the inevitable heartbreak that follows, I plead with you today to counter the lure of the world by making time for the Lord in your life, each and every day. Same talk. Let's use the same word. Plead. President Nelson said, My brothers and sisters, I plead with you to make time for the Lord. Make your own spiritual foundation firm and able to stand the test of time by doing those things that allow the Holy Ghost to be with you, always. I think there's things that concern them. The watchmen on the tower see things maybe a little bit far off than what we do and are pleading with us to get ready. Chapter 22 focuses on the kingdom of Judah around Jerusalem. Now, there's a part where it's going to talk about the Kidron Valley. The Kidron Valley is, you got the Temple Mount here, and the valley comes down, and then over here you have Gethsemane. So in the valley in between is the Kidron Valley. He's also going to refer to the upper pool and Hezekiah's tunnel that goes from the upper pool to the lower pool. And he also has kind of imagery, just talks about the broken down houses that they used. They got these houses and broke them down to fortify a wall. So this is the Kidron Valley. You can see in front that you have the Temple Mount. Right down below is the valley. And if you're looking right at the feet, at the very bottom of this picture, that is the Mount of Olives, where Gethsemane is. The road that's probably right by my head, let me get my cursor back over here, where these buses are, is going to extend up here. And on this side is kind of where the Catholic Church has preserved some great historical sites. On this side is kind of the non-Catholic side. But it is a great place to go in Gethsemane. But Mount of Olives is both sides. And he also speaks of, Isaiah, the top part of the water supply. When Israel or Jerusalem's about ready to be attacked by the Assyrian army, they have to protect this water supply, and they've got to get it to a little more secure location. So what Hezekiah does is he gets a tunnel that starts from the upper pool and goes to the lower pool. And that way the water is going to flow and be protected and go down to the lower pool where it can be, well, the city can use it if they're sieged. So that's kind of the upper part. You have the tunnel, and this is the lower pool, or part of the lower pool where you would be secure for water source. He also talks about a broad wall, or a wall that, well, when the siege is happening, there's breaches in the wall, and so it's a really quick defense. You take down some of the houses, and this is a preparation, so you're not sieged and you lose, and you just put them all together. This is what's left, the remnants of that wall. If you look, you can see a little marker. Oh, let me go back. Okay. This right here just lets you know, here's about how high it would have been. And you can just picture a wall with little bits of old people, or little bits of houses that are now just crumbled together in a makeshift wall to protect the city. As the Assyrians began their invasion, King Hezekiah began preparations to protect Jerusalem. In an effort to deprive the Assyrians of water, springs outside the city were blocked. Workers then dug a 533-meter tunnel to the springs of Gilah, providing the city with fresh water. Additional siege preparations included fortification of the existing walls, constructions of towers, and the erection of a new reinforcing wall. So in Isaiah 22, here's the way he describes it. Verse 9, "Ye have seen also the breaches of the city of David, that they are many. You've gathered together the waters of the lower pool. You've numbered the houses of Jerusalem, and the houses you've broken down to fortify the wall." But you're taking account, how many houses did we have to break down to get this wall fortified? How many are left? Verse 11, "You also made a ditch between the two walls for the water of the old pool." All these security measures. Then Isaiah says, look, you forgot one thing. You forgot probably the most important thing. But, in verse 11, "You've not looked unto the maker thereof, neither have had respect unto him that fashioned it long ago." All these defenses are great. But the most important thing is, do you trust and have faith in God? So encouraged by Isaiah, Hezekiah gathers the citizens to the square and encourages them by reminding them that the Assyrians possessed only the arm of flesh, but the Judeans had the protection of Yahweh, Jehovah. And verse 22, very much about teaching about Christ. "And the key of the house of David will I lay upon his," Christ's, "shoulder." He's going to have the keys. "So he shall open, none shall shut. He shall shut, none shall open." And I just pause there. Christ is going to have keys that no one else is going to have. He has to have the keys of death over death and hell. It's Christ. He's going to open the door, the key to unlock death, that people can rise again and be resurrected. No one's going to take that from him. He may delegate it, but that's his. He has that authority, that power. And I will fasten, verse 23, him, Christ, as a nail in a sure place. Now, if you picture this like a picture on a wall, and the picture's heavy, you look for somewhere where it's really secure. Maybe it's going to be a post. You put a nail on that, so the picture is going to hang. For this, that picture is representing of all of our hopes, all of our dreams. They're going to be held up by Christ. And that imagery, the nail is not just one nail that's may come slip, but a second nail in a sure place to make sure that he will be fastened on the cross in with two nails in each arm, one in the hand, one in the wrist. And he, Christ, shall be for a glorious throne to his Father's house. And they shall hang upon him all the glory of his Father's house. We know all the glory hangs on Christ's atonement, what he suffers in Gethsemane and on the cross. And the rest of the verse, everyone's dreams. Vessels are small, big, everything hangs on Christ. Chapters 13 to 23 were mostly addressed to other nations, but Isaiah taught and emphasized principles, blessings, and warnings to people and leaders of those nations that, number one, I think would give them hope, and it's going to lead them closer to God. His purpose was to teach the truths that applied to all the world. Turning to God gives hope and peace, regardless of where you live. Isaiah compared nations and their leaders to events that will happen in the last days. Some of the doctrines that are taught in these chapters were, I know I didn't cover all this in the video. I do cover this in my books, but some of the things that Isaiah teaches. Israel's redeemed through Jehovah's gracious compassion. And he's just that reminder. It's through God. Moab bases her appeal to Zion for shelter, and the throne shall be established in loving kindness. The Philistines are not allowed to rally themselves with Judah against Assyria because Jerusalem's already invulnerable through their faith in Jehovah. The allied forces of Damascus and Israel, that's the northern kingdom, had failed because they forsook God for their salvation. They forsook God for idols. Ethiopia is converted to Jehovah through seeing God's hand throughout history. Egypt one day is won, or will be won, to Jehovah's worship through divine discipline. And Edom, a little bit of fickleness, their cry for light in the night is not deep nor sincere enough to secure her from rejoicing over Judah's calamities. Therefore, it's not sufficient to avert her deserved doom. Careless, godless abandon on the part of a people in imminent peril of siege, is a sin. You may be prepared for all these military things, but you gotta trust in God. A man's pride, and I didn't cover this because there's a person who's quite prideful, even somebody who's of high office or state, shall bring him low. And Isaiah uses an example of someone who pride one day will bring him low. And the profits derived from merchandise are no better normally than the hire of a harlot, unless it's consecrated to the service of God. Hey, thanks a little bit for spending some time with me with Isaiah's chapter 15 to 23. My purpose really is that I hope that some of the things that I shared with you bring hope. That there's some things that as I went through that maybe you learned can help you today to come closer to the Savior. If you want kind of the commentary of each of the verses, because I know I went pretty fast, it was given. I kind of like my books, but I know I'm biased. And once again, a shout out to Cedar Fort, who published them for me. Love what they did and how they worked with me. Hey, thank you very much. I hope you have a lovely day. Keep smiling.